The second time the phone rattled. Nora Harper set the receiver into its cradle and counted to 10 so she wouldn't throw it through the kitchen window.
On the other end of the line.
Aunt Ruth had said the same thing she'd said the first time. Don't run. Don't use so much as step off your porch.
Help is coming.
Pack a bag and sit tight.
Sugar. Sit tight.
Nora glanced around the crooked little farmhouse on the last dogleg of Hickory Run Road and thought about all the things in her life that had lately been cinched.
Barred. Bolted. And buttoned tight.
The new white picket fence her husband, Caleb, had hammered into the red clay with the stubbornness of a man who wanted the world to know where his world ended. The iron gate with the sliding bar you could only work with 2 hands and your back. The 7 deadbolts on 2 doors that used to sigh when you pushed them with your hip. She rubbed the small of her back, felt their child roll beneath her ribs, and said to the empty kitchen,
Vire not running anuvere.
A summer wind worried the screens. Somewhere out in the sweetgum trees a screech owl stitched the dusk together with a single high thread. In the back bedroom, Caleb checked the window latches again. The metal clicks too loud in a house that used to have room for silence. When Nora's belly had started to show, Caleb had come home with a request form for a telephone line and the look of a boy who'd found a $20 bill. He had stood there at the sink and said he wanted her to be able to reach a doctor in under a minute. He wanted her daddy reachable by a spin of the dial. He wanted her to have the world at the end of a cord.
It was sweet.
It was also just the first brick. The new porch steps had treads wide as church pews. A railing sturdy enough to lean your whole life on. He'd put a spring on the screen door and a turning lock no child could outsmart. He'd raised that fence and set the gate and taken to walking the line at dusk like a watchman on a wall. Then the guns had come home. A revolver he slid into the top drawer of the nightstand as if it belonged beside the hand cream and Bible. A long shotgun with a barrel that looked like it could end an argument from 50 yards. Later she found a second pistol in the flour bin and a third behind the towels.
Expecting a war?
She had asked.
Half lauking.
When he dropped the 3 separate keys required to seal the back door into her palm. The look that flashed through his eyes was so raw she took a step back. It was there and gone.
Atier in a black curtain.
As the due date crept closer, he slept in fits. Sometimes not at all. Twice she woke to him on the porch.
Bare-chested.
Sweat silver on his shoulders despite the night breeze. The rifle leveled at the treeline. 3 other times she woke to the sound of every lock in the house working under his hands in a fevered rhythm. When he finally broke,
he did it on both knees.
He had been doing his rounds at the front door. Lips moving with numbers only he could see. When Nora put her hands on his shoulders and said, gently, tell me who you think is coming for us. He always had the same pat answer any father would be careful.
The world was not kind.
It was his job but this time the words wouldn't come.
He folded where he stood.
Hands on her belly like he was confessing to the child.
I got lost. Noah, he said through his teeth.
Up past Walker's Ridge. Lost on ground I could find blind drunk with a sack on my head. He pressed his forehead to her stomach. I called. And something answered. It had eyes like a coal seam catching light and a voice like a creek under ice. I asked for the way out.
It asked for a price. What price? Her voice came out flat.
She'd grown up with a mother who knew the names of herbs by moon phase and ants who could braid a blessing into your hair. She didn't like the shape of the air in the room. Caleb swallowed.
Firstborn.
Nora's throat went cold. She could feel the baby turning. As if trying to find his own way to the door.
You came home, she said.
Each word neat and sharp as if set along a hem. And you didn't tell me.
I thought I could. Fix it. Build it out. Lock it out. Pray it out.
He looked up at her with eyes rubbed red by sleep he couldn't catch.
I was wrong.
She wanted to slap him. She wanted to hold his head in her lap and say the words you say to a child who's broken something you can't replace. Instead she went to the phone and called Tennessee. The call Aunt Ruth Calloway answered on the second ring. Like she'd been sitting beside the stove with a cup of chicory waiting on more than coffee.
Auntie. Nora said. It's me. I know that.
Ruth said.
Voice like cigar smoke.
That boy finally told you.
Yes.
You got time to bring a baby into this world. You got time to fix what needs fixing.
Ruth exhalet. Listen close. Don't you run.
Don't you even pack like you're running. We could catch the train at daylight. Nora said. Out of habit more than hope.
Running breaks the compact. Ruth snapped. Alhanigone.
If I'm right about the thing that took his promise, it'll take that as license to drag you by your ankles to the nearest crossroads.
You stay put.
I'll call a man who owes our people a small favor. He'll get you to me and your Uncle May in one piece. Nora leaned into the phone like she could climb inside the wire.
Who?
You'll know him when you see him.
Ruth said.
And you won't like that you know him.
Pack a bag.
Tell your daddy it's something your mama would have handled if her name were still walking. That'll get him moving. The click in Nora's ear was final as a door.
She packed. She did not run.
She sent Caleb to fetch Frank Norris with the message Ruth had given her. And when Caleb asked what that meant,
she said,
"It means you do as I say." And shut the door with a hand that didn't shake until the latch held. She packed the kind of things women whose mamas taught them the old ways pack when they're going to cross a line after dark: a jar of salt,
a twist of retreat,
a nail pounded flat with a Bible verse murmured over it, a snarl of iron keys that had belonged to her mother and her grandmother and the last midwife who'd made it out of a blizzard behind a mule. Then she sat in the front room on the old sofa they dragged in from Caleb's folks' place and wrapped both hands around her belly. The child inside flicked a heel against her palm like he was counting along.
At sundown,
2 male silhouettes came up the walk, Caleb with a shotgun on his shoulder and Frank in his Sunday hat with a pistol riding his belt like it had grown there.
Behind them,
a black panel truck rolled slow up the dirt lane and sighed to a stop. It wasn't the hired hand from the next county like Nora had expected. It was newer than anything that usually rattled down Hickory Run and as unmarked as a secret. The driver cut the engine and the evening came up around them. Cicadas and the end of daylight arguing softly over whose turn it was.
The door opened. A man stepped down into the last yellow glare of the sun. He wasn't tall. He wasn't young.
He had the kind of weight a courthouse has, some of it flesh. Most of it history. His brown suit shone like it had been brushed with whiskey, and his hat made him look like he had money even if the suit wanted to argue the point. He moved like someone who carried favors and debts in the pockets above his heart.
Mr. Harper. Mr. Norris.
His voice had the kind of ease men drink to borrow. And that must make you Mrs.
Nora.
Frank didn't offer his hand.
Name.
The man turned and took Frank's hand before Frank could decide whether to withdraw it. Shaking once with a grip warm as stove iron.
Names Gideon Whitlock. He said. Folks hu over me call me Gideon. Folks I over call me Mr. Whitlock.
Your people sent me.
Mr. Norris.
I'm here to take your daughter. Your son-in-law. And your not yet fallen evening star to a place that'll keep the wrong hands off your threshold. And if we say no?
Frank asked.
Then you're free men who'll stand free in front of what's coming.
Gideon said.
And the smile didn't reach his eyes. I didn't come to talk anybody into anything.
Nora stepped onto the porch. I'll call you Gideon, she said.
And watched the way he watched her. Which was the way men look at a river crossing after a flood. He touched the brim of his hat. We'll leave at dark proper, he said. And we will not take the government's roads. They rode with Frank up front and Gideon at the wheel. Caleb took the bench along the back wall by the tool chest. The shotgun across his knees and gilt heavy as a lap blanket. Nora sat near the back doors. One hand on the latch and the other on the life inside her. Steady as you can be when your heart has an audience. Hickory Run flickered past in slices of farmhouse and field.
Gideon drove like a man hot lierne to talk and think and pray on the wheel.
At a three-way. He took the right-hand cut that ran north and bad instead of west and smooth. Guiding the truck past a clapboard church and a stretch where the road gave up and became 2 ruts and a suggestion. Frank frowned at the windshield. You're headed toward Bent Laurel.
I am.
Gideon's hands didn't move on the wheel. Place died before my father did. Blew open like the face of God. Frank didn't look at him when he spoke. Whole mountain took to burning under its own dirt. My uncle said the fire didn't burn like a fire.
It crawled. Gideon nodded once. I was there.
He said it the way you admit to a scar.
Jure not old genug.
Frank said. finally looking over with a suspicion that had saved his hide more than once. I'm older than I have a right to be,
Gideon said.
and let that be the end of it.
The sign for Pocahontas rose up out of the dark like a tombstone.
And beyond it a hand-painted warning sagged on a post where the whitewashed letters had washed away, Bent Laurel East Mine.
Closed.
Private property.
Keep out.
Trespassers will be shot on sight.
No fence. No chain. No lock.
Just the kind of emptiness a place makes when it's tired of telling you to leave it alone.
Gideon turned in.
The truck rolled easy down a sandy cut and then coughed and shuddered to a stop.
The headlamps flickered. Went out. Night came down like a lead.
Nora felt the hair at the back of her neck climb and grip. You stay in the truck.
Gideon said. You close your eyes if you like.
I don't recommend it.
Gideon. Nora said.
What are you about to do? Call an old debt. He said over his shoulder.
En vanes het trug se drivas door like a man stepping behind a courtroom.
They heard him lift the rear doors and rummage. A minute later his voice rang in that place that had once known the thunder of engines and dynamite.
Heil to the travelas. He said.
Not loudly but so that the words went down into the ground and came up again.
I stand upon your threshold to call upon von who oves me tries.
One boon you have returned. I come to collect the second.
I bring flint, steel, and fire.
I ask an audience with those who take the names of the unburied, who keep count where men chose not to. I make this offering and ask passage,
and justice,
and the memory that binds both.
He struck flint to steel.
A miner's lantern bloomed with a light that wasn't right. It was pale as a full moon left too long in a bowl of water and cold enough to make Nora's teeth ache. She wished he hadn't lit it.
In the light, the coot and the slope and the tres resolvedant so dice faces.
Dozens at first and then hundreds. A ring around the truck.
Child tal and child sin and child broken.
Boys with coal dust in the lines of their fingers. Boys with caps pulled low over empty places where eyes should have been. Boys with shirts burned to lace and boys who held themselves like rope held them up. Not one of them moved. Every single one leaned toward that light like flowers reaching for a sun that wanted nothing to do with warmth. Frank started praying under his breath in a voice that grated like shovel on stone. Caleb closed his eyes and opened them again because the dark behind his lids felt warmer than what he'd seen but not kinder. Nora pressed her palm to the iron latch and felt the child inside her punch once.
Hard. A teeny protest against the cold.
I know you're here,
Gideon said.
Facing the crowd like a man at a town meeting everyone had died to attend.
And you over me. Boy. Come say your piece.
The ring shifted. A figure came through it. And Nora couldn't hold on to what he was. One step he was a man with a face folded by years he couldn't have lived. The next he was raw bone and heat. The next he was what he must have been the day he kissed his mother's cheek and went underground for the first time, 12.
My betierten. Hat brim lo.
Hands nicked where the shovel had learned to bite.
He lifted one hand.
Gideon placed the lantern in it. And it didn't look heavy until you saw what it lit. I find it good,
the boy said.
But it was a man's voice with dust in it. So say I. So say we all. The dead answered. And the phrase landed on the truck's roof like hail. We need the road the company never built,
Gideon said.
We need the part of it that leaves no wheel ruts but still goes somewhere. I'm taking these folks to Callaway Hollow. There are those who will try to cut us off. The boy smiled without showing teeth. There always are.
Gideons hat brim kutze leid. You know what's asking on the other side.
I know what he calls himself,
the boy said.
I know what he is. Then you know we're in a hurry.
Gideon tilted his head.
Like a man listening for a train that might or might not be on time. Will you carry us?
We will, the boy said.
And for a second his face ran like water and came back older. But you'll pay the third before you leave our county.
Whitlock. You know that. I do, Gideon said.
And for the first time since they'd met him, his voice found a piece of ground that didn't feel sure underfoot.
The lantern rang like a bell with no metal in it. The engine coughed.
The headlamps surged cold and then warm.
Gideon klimbet back behind the wheel. Hat brim lo as if against rein.
and drove the black panel truck into a dark that moved out of the way when it saw them coming. They made Callaway Hollow just past midnight by a route Nora couldn't have described if someone had pushed a pencil into her hand. The truck climbed and fell and skirted the edge of places that felt like doors, until the road ran down into a crease in the mountain where the trees were old enough to remember being something else. A white house sat back from the road on a pocket of flat ground like a compromise. The front porch was wide and low, its floorboards sagging toward a center that had held generations of footfalls. Yellow light stood in the windows without having to try. When Gideon cut the engine, the knight stepped forward, and then the door opened and stepped back because Ruth Callaway came out of it. She was a tall woman who looked taller because she knew which part of the earth belonged to her. Her hair was a gray braid with a ribbon of black still running through it. And her hands were the kind that could catch a baby or a copperhead and not get bit doing either. "You took your time," she said to Gideon. "I could have hit you with a dish towel an hour and a half ago." "Stopped to pay a toll," Gideon said. Ruth looked past him to Nora, and something in her face changed. "You could live long enough to watch a thunderhead decide whether to break this way or that." "Come on," she said, and held out both arms. Nora went right into them. "The way you step into shedde when it is hard enough of you." They ate in the kitchen. Because the kitchen answers more questions than any other room. Ruth's sister, my, moved quiet as a thought. Sliding cornbread onto plates and setting jars of beans in the middle of the table, like that was what needed to be in the center, and not the fact that a man with ember eyes wanted somebody's child. Frank took the straight-back chair near the window and put his hat on the sill. Crown down. Like a man ready to get up again in a hurry. Caleb sat and didn't touch his food. Ruth wiped her hands on a flour sack towel and brought an old ledger to the table. She set it down, and the wood gave a little. The cover was white leather, scuffed and stained with years. The spine bound in silver that had been hammered thin and stitched again and again with red thread until the sewing itself was an argument. "Your mama left this with me," Ruth said. "Said you'd be the one to carry it when the time came. I told her I hoped she was wrong about the timing. Looks like she wasn't wrong about the child." "What is it?" Caleb asked. Because he needed a thing to look at that wasn't the fear in his wife's face. Ruth turned the ledger so he could see. The pages didn't look like they belonged to this world. The handwriting did, though. It was dainty in places and furious in others. And some of the lines had been traced by more than one hand. "It's names," Ruth said. "And the prices paid for them. It's what our people write down when the world won't. When a company store takes the last of your winter coal and your boys' boots besides. When a man in a suit signs a paper that makes fire run under a mountain and nobody writes his name on the fire. When a thing with eyes that don't have any business in human light takes a promise from a man who's cold and scared and not thinking. And comes back later with a knife that fits a cradle." She put her finger on a page in the middle and lifted her eyes to Caleb. "What did you say to the thing on the ridge?" "I said I needed a way home," Caleb said. His voice so small he could hear his mother's pan cupboard in it. "I said my wife was carrying our child." "What did it say to you?" Ruth asked. "It said it liked the sound of that." Caleb looked at the ledger like a man looks at a mirror he doesn't want to stand in front of. "It said its price didn't matter if I didn't live to pay it. It said firstborn, and I said yes." Ruth nodded once and shut the book like a door. "So tat's wer wie a." "Wer wie a," Gideon said, "is a place with thresholds. That thing can come right up to one and smile through it if you ask it a question. But it can't come across without being invited by somebody who has the right to ask it in." Caleb looked at him. "And who has that right?" "People with the kind of power that comes from paper you can read in daylight," Gideon said. "Or blood." He met Ruth's eyes and the ledger sat between them like a third person. "Me put a hand on Nora's shoulder." "You ready to do something foolish and right in the same hour?" she asked softly. Nora laughed without meaning to. It sounded like it belonged to the house. "I've been doing that since I said yes to a man who thinks he can keep storm and story out with a deadbolt." "We need to make the circle," Ruth said. "We need iron and salt and a piece of the thing that wants what it wants." Gideon pulled a small cloth bag from his coat pocket and set it on the table like a man who'd be happy not to ever set it anywhere. "Coal," he said. "From under bent Laurel. Still hot when I picked it up." May looked at him. "You paid a price for that." Gideon pulled his sleeve down over his wrist.
I pay my bills, he said. Mostly. Frank stood. Where do you want me? At the door, Ruth said.
With a Bible you'd swear on. They worked quick because night doesn't wait. May laid a length of iron chain in a circle in the front room and threaded it with red thread and a string of salt that ran like winter down the line. Ruth chalked 4 marks on the floorboards that were older than the marks and muttered names that weren't in the ledger and should have been. Caleb poured a line of salt across the threshold and set the shotgun where any man would see it and know it wasn't the thing that would matter. Frank stood at the door with a hand on the Bible. You could ask whether he was more comfortable with that hand on a gun.
The house didn't ask.
Gideon took up his place by the window with the coal in its bag like a heart nobody wanted and the knowledge that he was down to one favor in this county. Nora sat on the floor in the circle with her back against the sofa they'd inherited and the ledger open on her knees. The baby hiccuped and she pressed her palm there and said,
"Wie all right."
And for a second she believed it.
The knock came like a policeman coming to collect on a bet you'd forgotten you'd made. Once. Twice. 3 times.
Frank didn't say come in. He said, "Who sends you?" The voice that answered could have been a deacon or a banker. It could have been the man who sold you your wife's wedding ring at the jewelry counter and told you she'd like a different setting and you believed him against your gut.
I come on my own business. Mr. Norris, it said.
I come because something is owed. Frank opened the door the smallest amount a man can open a door without being accused of rudeness outright. On the porch stood a tall gentleman in a black suit that had never seen a wrinkle it could keep. His hair was the color of anthracite and shone the way anthracite does when you haul it by hand and it takes a piece of your skin for interest. His eyes were ember orange behind lids that blinked when you expected nothing to blink.
Norris, he said,
tilting his head like he was trying on the name.
Crow,
Frank said. Because you should call a thing what it is if you know it, and if you don't you shouldn't pretend.
Mr.
Crow smiled a suggestions-only smile.
May I come in? No.
Ruth said from the center of the room.
Notbotering Zustand. Mr.
Crow's eyes moved to Gideon.
You again. He said.
You have a way of being where I've got business. I travel. Gideon said. And his voice didn't offer anything like hospitality.
You over on a separate ledger. Mr.
Crow said. We can talk about that after this one. We'll talk about nothing at all if you don't speak right. Ruth said.
And the kitchen light ticket on the like a clock when you wind it. Mr.
Crow took his hat off. Because civility is a weapon. A compact was made. He said to the room. A man asked for his life. And he was given it. He promised the firstborn issue of his line. Nora's voice surprised her. It was clear and exact and full of a thing she had not had the right to speak until now. He doesn't have the right to promise me.
She said.
He doesn't have the right to promise what I carry. He had the right to promise what he can make. Crow said. And that was when Gideon stepped forward. The little bag of coal in his hand. You'll want to be careful with that kind of sentence.
Friend. He said. You start counting ricks like that.
You're going to end up outnumbered in a county you think you own. Crow's eyes shifted. The orange darkening as if a little air had gone missing from the room.
You broke the mountain with you. He said. How quaint.
I brought a witness. Gideon said. And set the bag on the sill beside Frank's hat. You know the law as well as I do. A bargain made under duress in a place where a man's name can be burnt into the earth without paper is a bargain that can be reopened if an older court has a say.
What court?
Crow asked. And smiled because he already knew.
The one underground. Ruth said.
The one whose docket never closes. She tapped the ledger on Nora's knees.
And this one.
Caleb stood up because his legs told him to. And faced the door because he should have done it earlier.
Take me. He said.
The words fumbled but whole. It was my ask and my answer. Take me and leave them. Crow didn't bother to look at him.
You think I want a man?
You think I don't have a dozen men a month tear their own names off and bring me the scraps because they're tired and hungry and the world taught them to be cheap?
I don't need a man.
I need the first of a line. I need the answer to a question that will echo. May knelt and set her hand flat on Nora's knee.
You ready? She asked. Nora nodded. Mr. Crow, Ruth said. We have a counteroffer.
We have an older name to put against your claim.
Crow cocked his head. What name?
The name of the man who signed the papers that set the fire under Bent Laurel and wrote checks on the lives of boys whose families never got a letter. Never mind a number to put on a headstone.
Ruth said. Voice stidi es water coming out of rock.
He used your banker.
He used your contracts.
He used your mouth when he said safety cost too much. You're misremembering history.
Crow said.
The mountain doesn't misremember,
Gideon said,
and lifted the bag to drop one piece of coal into his palm. It was blacker than it should have been, and when he put it in the circle the salt around it hissed high and thin, and Nora could swear she heard it say a last name. The front room filled with a breath that wasn't the house's. The air smelled like rain and old pennies and the little nip you get in your tongue when you're about to lie and decide not to. The world tilted in the part of your vision you don't use until something's wrong. They were in the room and not in the room. The Lantern Boys. Nora didn't know that name. But her bones did stepped around the furniture, like furniture was a language they were still learning. They anchored themselves to the corners Ruth had marked and to the coal in the middle, and a boy with a hat brim pulled low over a face that couldn't make up its mind how old it was set the miner's lantern down in the circle and looked at Mr.
Crow. Dead. He said. Mr.
Crow's eyes flared.
Name. Ruth said.
The boy didn't take his eyes off Crow.
You know it. He said.
You wore it when you signed for the bonds. You wore it when you shut down the church house on a Thursday so the payroll could go to the new boilers.
Crow smiled like a coot.
You think you can take me?
He said.
You think because you have a story you have teeth. The boy's smile was small and kind and terrible. We don't want to take you.
He said.
We want to take back what you took when you changed the word price into the word cost. He lifted the lantern.
The light went colder.
Frank took a step back. Bible sliding on the sill. And the room stepped with him.
Mr. Crow,
Gideon said quietly. You're being called to a court that recognizes what firstborn means when you force it to. You can stand on this porch and argue paper. Or you can come outside and remember that the ground remembers you. Crow looked at Nora for the first time. It wasn't a look you could live on the far side of.
You think this ends anything? He asked her.
And the anger in his voice made him,
for a second, sound human.
You think you can make an example of me and not have another man in a better suit take my place by morning? Violence has a ledger too.
Little motor.
Nora lifted the ledger on her knees. Then we'll keep writing, she said. Ruth stood. She went to the door and put her hand on the frame and spoke the name the coal had said. The name hung in the air like iron filings around a magnet.
Graues smile cracked.
He hadn't expected anyone to say it. He had come for a sentence without hearing his own.
Come and answer, Ruth said.
Crow stepped across the threshold because he had to. The circle of boys widened.
The light deepened.
Because sometimes light makes a thing honest. He didn't scream when they took him.
Screaming is what you do when you think someone can stop what's happening.
He went down like a man who'd been standing on rotten porch boards for a while and finally quit pretending he hadn't heard the creak. The lantern went low. The room righted itself. The bag on the sill grew lighter by the kind of ounce that still weighs a lot. The boy put the lantern back in Gideon's hand and lifted his hat for Nora. Not quite enough to be called gallantry. Keep the thresholds clean, he said.
Name's a child. Names matter. Ruth nodded to him. Price?
Gideon put his hand in his pocket and brought it out slow.
Palm up.
He was holding nothing that a normal eye can see. Which is a good way to hold what time costs.
Take it, he said. And the boy did. Gideon's face shungered.
He didn't get older. He got more true. The kind of truth you see in a man who's cashed in his last IOU in a county he loves. The Lantern Boys faded like smoke after a hard rain.
Mr. Crow was gone.